Channel 56 News and Public Affairs, in cooperation with the Cambridge Forum, presents Cambridge, USA. A look at Cambridge, yesterday, today, and in the future.
"1983 has been quite a year here in Cambridge, and now that the new year is upon us, it's a good time to take a look back at what's been happening in our city over the past 12 months. I'm Jim Vetter of the Cambridge Forum, which produces this program, and with me for our Year in Review program is David Wiegand, editor of the Cambridge Chronicle. David, it's good to have you back after being here last year.
Nice to be here.
Also with us is Mindy Blodgett. Mindy is a reporter for the Cambridge Tab.
Hello, good to be here.
Well, it strikes me that the biggest issue, the biggest thing about 1983 is the fact that it's an election year. And there's certainly a lot of things we could talk about that election. A lot happened. But, David, what would you say was the one biggest thing out of the Cambridge election?
I think probably the nuclear-free Cambridge referendum, which was something that was a focus of attention not only in Cambridge and throughout the Boston metropolitan area, but in fact both nationally and internationally as well. It was it would have been a precedent-setting establishment of a nuclear-free zone in the city, which has a nuclear weapons industry, and ultimately the question went down to defeat in what turned out to be an extremely expensive campaign.
We actually had a debate program on the nuclear-free Cambridge issue. Let's take a look. We have a clip with Eric Siegel from Mobilization for Survival. Let's take a look at that right now.
People say that we have to wait. Well, we've waited and waited and waited. At some point, waiting for disarmament becomes not only foolish, but extremely dangerous, and not just for one group of people or another, but for all of humanity. In this city, we have a chance to take a strong stand, to say that it's too dangerous to wait another 33 years. We can be remembered as the place where the tide of nuclear destruction hit its peak and then rolled back. And we can do it without sacrificing the quality of life of anybody.
Now, Cambridge is a community that's always been known for being very hot about the nuclear issue.
That's very true.
What happened?
I personally feel that one of the main problems with the campaign is that the Mobilization for Survival and the other members of the campaign were not able to get the community support. And the members of Citizens Against Research Bans, the main group fighting the referendum, were able to convince the population of Cambridge that they were fighting for the good of Cambridge, that if the referendum passed, there would be an economic holocaust, hundreds, possibly thousands of people would lose jobs. They were able to convince the voters that for their own good they should vote no, whereas the mobilization people were never able to really get a grassroots sort of wave of support for the referendum.
Now, you also had a front page story, David, about the difference in spending in that.
Which was significant. I mean, there was a significant difference. As of last week, with the reports that were filed with the city, Citizens Against Research Bans had spent about $500,000. And people at Mobilization for Survival estimate that it was probably the most expensive election dollar per vote held in the nation's history. And so certainly money here was a major factor in the outcome, without question.
Well, it struck me, too, in the course of the debate, that the mobilization people didn't always answer the questions that CARB was putting out.
Oh, definitely. They didn't address the problem adequately enough of the jobs question.
Right.
On the one hand, they, as we saw Eric just now talking about the importance of the referendum, that it was a monumental vote. On the other hand, they didn't address the problem that it could be monumental in the fact that people could lose jobs. They would, on the one hand, they would say, well, it's not that important. I mean, it's not going to be a major vote in that it's not going to hurt a lot of people necessarily, close to home. However, it is important because it's symbolic, and it confused the voters, I think, that, they didn't explain their stand strongly enough.
I think that certainly was an issue, or most of the Cambridge voters I talked about just weren't sure up until the time they went to vote what exactly was going on.
Or even people who could have been their natural constituency. Many nuclear-free supporters in Cambridge, although that aspect of the problem was was overemphasized, I think, by CARB. They sort of delighted in saying that, well, even nuclear-free supporters don't support the referendum. But it's true, there were many supporters who were confused. They really didn't know how to vote.
I think an important factor to mention here, along the lines of what Mindy is saying, is to look at the university community per se, where you have a number of people who normally would be in favor of a freeze, but the wording of the question as it applied to restrictions of research in a city dominated by MIT and Harvard is extremely dangerous, and in fact gave me the most problem personally as I analyzed the question toward the end of the campaign.
Well, the other referendum issue that I certainly found initially confusing was the cable one. It seemed that part of the whole issue was what the question was saying.
Very true. Yeah.
That was, I think the question was very simply put, but I think that the propaganda put out by the people who were opposed to the question and who eventually won led you to believe that the question meant a lot more or a lot less than what it said. Basically, it authorized the city to compete for its own franchise for cable television. It did not would not have okayed public ownership of cable. However, people were deluded, I think, by a lot of publicity into believing that if they voted yes on this question, there would be no doubt that the city would have public ownership of its own cable system.
I think the argument on the other side was that because it was the city that was finally going to have to decide what the best bid was, it was going to be difficult for the city not to decide in favor of a municipal system.
Well, actually, I think the arguments weren't really in the forefront of the campaign. Unfortunately, that was a problem. Once again, we're back to nuclear-free. That dominated the election. In many ways, I think the cable television referendum is probably more important to each and every Cambridge citizen than nuclear-free ever was, in the respect that cable television, if it had been or would become municipally owned, could be an extremely important part of the community. And the issues weren't discussed adequately enough. The two sides formed late. They sent out confusing literature.
And they had almost the same name.
Oh, well, that was a ploy on one side or another, I imagine. Who knows which side. But unfortunately, I think the question itself was not adequately debated, and that was one of the problems with the vote.
What do you make of the election as a whole, aside from referendums?
In terms of, I've been in newspapers since 1970. I cannot recall an election that has been so fascinating to cover. In every respect, and also, let's not forget that there were a number of candidates seeking city council and school committee seats, and how all of that washed down was also very, very fascinating. It's particularly, once again, given Cambridge's system of PR voting, which very few people understand outside of Cambridge, but that always makes
people
it interesting.
inside Cambridge.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but I'll let you say it, Jim.
But what do you make of the results of the voting? You said it was an interesting race. But
well, certainly. Obviously, the referendum questions dominated the election. However, as David points out, there were some new city councilors and some new school committee members elected as well. Probably the school committee race was the most interesting in an almost hidden way. The city council race always gets the most attention, but the school committee race was fascinating. There are now more independents than there have been in many years on the school committee. The school superintendent's tenure could be in jeopardy because of the new school committee. A lot of things could be happening in January, come January, when the new members are seated.
Well, one thing that was much ballyhooed in terms of the schools was this idea of a new school of the future that we were going to see starting up this fall. The idea being that we were going to be right there in the forefront, Cambridge always out in the forefront, in putting computers into the schools. Now, there was a lot of press about it when the idea first came out, but it seems as though it had a little bit of trouble getting started. And in fact, we had one of the representatives, the director of the School of the Future, on the program a few weeks back. Let's take a look at a clip of Deborah Ross, director of the School of the Future. Let's take a look at that clip right now.
Yes and no. I think that along the way we were pretty clear that our first year and probably several years to follow will be developmental years, that we are not attempting to have a program that is completely determined and completely settled and completely programmed starting right now. What we are looking forward to, and I think this reflects on something that Mike said, we're looking to an ongoing process where both the teachers and the students will be developing almost simultaneously, and that this we hope will add a new vitality to the whole learning experience and the learning environment.
Well, the thing that Ms. Ross didn't mention was that she was really dealing with a very difficult job in putting together a school where my understanding was that they didn't even have the computers in the school the day they opened.
Minor problem, yes.
What happened with School of the Future?
Well, I think that it was born out of perhaps a political idea to begin with. There's no question this was politically, and I say that in a good meaning of the word, you know, people saw a need and politically they could fill it. Cambridge obviously has a major high-tech industry, and with the presence of MIT in particular, it only makes sense to try and take advantage of that in some way. The other problem we find with the high-tech industries is that today it is not attracting very many minority people for one reason or another. The city wanted to provide some mechanism to provide job training in this area. So they had an idea, and after they had the idea, they said, great, now what do we do? How do we really get this off the ground? So there was a lot of scrambling around, and everyone involved with the program admits that this first year is a learning experience for them as well as the students. But it's working well, and I think that I've talked to a number of parents, for example, who are very pleased with the way it's working so far.
And the kids are certainly excited about the idea.
They're having a great time.
Well, I think one of the problems, however, is that I'm sure the kids who are involved are very excited, but some of the criticisms from some of the parents in the schools as well as school committee members was that the program was sort of rushed into existence, as Dave points out, and it in many ways will not help a broad range of students. You know, only a few students can be in the program. It isn't, you know, it's exciting that it's off the ground at all, but the fact that it's a magnet school bothers some, that it won't be spread through other schools. Some people wish there were more groundwork laid, I think, and that more time had been put into it, but at least it is a beginning.
And perhaps they can go from there into all the other.
Sure.
What are the other big stories that you've been looking at in the past year?
We've been paying particular attention in the same area, talking about the schools, to the, I think what a lot of us see as the settling down of the minority staffing issue in the school system. The second of two recent court suits has been effectively settled at this point, and the school committee has basically, for the first time, worked out a minority hiring plan in writing. They had a procedure, but it was never in writing before, and the court suit, while it was a little bit difficult and entangled, resulted in a formal process, which now I think is at once it's implemented, should do a lot to kind of solve some of the dissension that has been created around this issue. And it's good to see that, frankly, because now perhaps, you know, once there's a more harmonious system going, we can get back to the business of education and so forth. So that's something that we've been continuing to follow and will follow.
Well, it's a relief to see that there's really been some progress in that too, because it was going back and forth.
It was.
Yes, it was a long, involved process.
Yeah.
I could list, oh God, all sorts of things, I'm sure, and David could too. There has been a lot done in the area of liquor licenses, which seems like a boring topic at
but
first.
Isn't necessarily.
But it is very dear to the hearts of many who live in Cambridge. It's an extremely important topic.
We'll come back to that. What are
Sure.
a few other general topics?
I think that there are some major health care issues in Cambridge that are going to come to the fore. Certainly the situation at the Cambridge Hospital, the arrest of the employees, was a sort of an upsetting development that many people saw as an outgrowth of general problems with health care in Cambridge.
Tell you what, Mindy, why don't we save that? We'll talk a little bit more about health care, we'll talk about liquor licensing, and I'd like to get into some of the more cultural issues too when we come back. We're going to be taking a little break right now, but when we come back, we'll be talking more about the year in review. Stay with us. We're back here on Cambridge, USA, taking a look at the year 1983 in review. With me to take a look at the year is David Wiegand, the editor of the Cambridge Chronicle. David. And also with us is Mindy Blodgett, a reporter for the Cambridge Tab. Now, you were mentioning, just before we went, that there were a bunch of issues in health care You were mentioning some problems at the hospital. What are the other issues you were looking at?
Well, the expansion of the Mount Auburn Hospital is something that is becoming a controversy in the surrounding neighborhood and also in the city as a whole, because some people fear that the expansion of the hospital will not only impact on the neighborhood parking, add to the woes that exist in the area, but that the expansion of the ambulatory services, for instance, may impact negatively on the Cambridge Hospital, which has been losing money and losing patients for quite a few years. That also the neighborhood health centers look to be in danger of being closed last spring. However, the city manager did find the money somewhere in the budget or in the state aid. I'm not sure where he found it now that I think back, but he has funded them again, but who knows if that can persist in the future. The hospital has been operating, with a deficit for a while.
Now, the other thing you mentioned was liquor licensing, and you said that it sounded like a boring topic, but it was definitely big news when Grendel's got its license. Actually, we had an interview with Sue Kulzer, who is one of the owners of Grendel's. Let's take a look at what she has to say about liquor licensing in Cambridge. Take a look at that now.
We opened Grendel's in 1971 in Harvard Square, and at that time we applied for a liquor license and were turned down because the church that was right next door vetoed the license. At that time there were not many other restaurants or licenses in the area, and we felt, well, we could do it just with the food and without liquor. But by 1976, several other restaurants had opened in the area, all of which were within 500 feet of the same church, and all of which had gotten liquor licenses without the church's veto. It was at that point we decided that maybe the climate had changed, and we reapplied for a license and were again turned down by the church. So we thought the law that allowed the church to do that must not be constitutional, and with the help of Professor Lawrence Tribe from the Harvard Law School, who was a customer at the restaurant and wanted to have a drink, and we explained to him why he couldn't.
So he decided to fight it with you, huh?
That's it. We decided to take it all the way as far as we could go, which was the Supreme Court of the United States.
Now, that's another issue where something that seems like sort of a minor local issue again reached national importance.
Yes, it was a very important decision on the part of the Supreme Court, and it certainly helped Grendel's Den. However, in the city of Cambridge, there is still a larger discussion about liquor license quotas. There is a particular restaurant in Harvard Square called Ruggles, which is still trying to get a license. I think it's at least 3 times they've gone to the Liquor License Commission.
That's been a long
well, the License
saga
Commission,
back
I
and
mean, to ask for a license, and they aren't getting them. People are thinking that there are too many licenses, that crime results from a plethora of liquor licenses in the area, and it's something that is continuing to be debated.
And that's been going back and forth. I know that in Central Square they've been worried too about the whole
All over the
liquor
there's
license.
Porter Square, Inman Square.
What are the other kind? You were mentioning before about the whole idea of development as well, thing with the expansion of Mount Auburn. Certainly this has been a year for lots of construction.
Yeah, I think that I think in large respect what we're seeing is a result of the economic recovery that's perhaps affecting the nation as a whole, and so we're seeing a number of major projects getting off the ground. Clearly, what's happening in Harvard Square is a focus of attention at this point. There are major developments that are in the process of being completed and being started up there, and a lot of people are very concerned, as they have been for a long time, as to the nature of the square, what it's going to be like when University Place is completed, and so forth and so on. You also have a lot of activity in East Cambridge around the waterfront at this point, and as ever, there is Simplex, which, people are saying finally 1984 we may see Simplex resolved. If so, you have these big pockets of Cambridge which are going to feel developmental pressures as they never have before. And trying to balance that, of course, with also preserving the quality of life in your neighborhoods is a problem that I think we can expect the city to be dealing with in a serious way in the year ahead.
Simplex has to be one of the longest running stories in Cambridge newspaper history.
It's really it's an amazing thing. I think to get back to the development, something I think the city is also going to be grappling with in what the city manager has called an unprecedented boom in development is will some of the development create jobs for Cambridge people? That's something that the city council is trying to approach and some local groups are trying to deal with. but it's a problem. It's nice to have all this development going up. It helps the city in many ways, but as David points out, it puts a pressure on the neighborhoods, and also where do the jobs go? There are many people in Cambridge who need jobs or would like to change careers.
Now, with all the construction going on in Harvard Square, we finally got something almost finished this year. The Harvard Square station actually opened, but it somehow wasn't the big event that I thought the opening of the Harvard Square station might be.
Well, keep in mind, first of all, that what is open now is a temporary station, the latest in the long-running series, I think. But at this point, it's going to be another 16 months or so before the final station is open. Now, that's if the MBTA is on schedule, and I have no comment about that whatsoever. So probably it'll be a couple of years. And it's an inadequate station, even on a temporary basis. The handicapped access is questionable at best, and the city's handicap commission made a great deal of noise about this to begin with, and they were momentarily appeased. The stairway is inadequate for fire safety protection, this sort of thing. And you know, it's probably all right for on the short term, but eventually we have to, you know, it'll be good when the final station is open. And of course, the question is always, you know, what does the square become then after all of that, all the construction is finished and the hole is covered over and so forth. And that's anybody's guess in a lot of ways.
That's very true. I think people were just depressed by the fact that there are still abutments up, and there was still a lot of rerouting going on with traffic, and it wasn't, as David points out, the completed process that everyone was envisioning probably 5 years ago.
Well, it seemed like every couple of months when I walked into Harvard Square this past year, I would find out-of-town tickets facing a different direction.
In a new place.
Yes, yeah.
Or yet another lack of parking somewhere. You know, there used to be parking on this street, now there isn't. And as the parking department has pointed out, construction has been moving and creeping around the square, and as it does, it gobbles up parking spaces with it, and they are not always replaced. You know, this loss, and that's a major problem, I'm afraid.
What are the other big events that you've been looking at in the year 1983, David?
Well, I think we've been paying a lot of attention to the changes in the city's demographics in the past 10 years, which I think has been rather interesting. We've been analyzing, for example, the result of the 1980 census, which of course takes at least a full year for the federal government and the city to begin breaking down those figures and so forth. And we're seeing how all of the changes in the community are reflected in developmental patterns, for example. And what we're finding to be very fascinating, I think, is a huge increase, relatively speaking, in the number of single heads of households in the city. Whereas 10 years ago, you found a lot more of the nuclear family dominance in Cambridge, and that change, I think, is rather interesting to look at in terms of what our housing needs may be in the future, and of course what they already are is critical, and how is that going to affect the situation in the future. That's been one major issue that we've been paying attention to.
Housing is certainly one of those, again, long-running issues.
Yes, always.
On something completely different entirely, and a big change that happened over the past year was with the River Festival.
Yeah.
Chris Kinnair came on the show back when the River Festival was happening in the summer to talk about the change there. Let's take a look at what Chris Kinnair had to say about the River Festival right now. It must be a sense, too, that more people can get involved. When it was only in 1 week, I always had the terrible feeling like there were 5 things that I was missing for everything that I could go to.
A lot of people told us that, yes. There was more than anyone could possibly see, and things were scheduled against each other, partly because the idea was to give this great cornucopia, overflowing with arts events. The things that are most loved about the festival we are preserving, and we have the strength, I think, now, from the previous years of the festival, to experiment a little bit and to respond to what we perceive as needs and situations, especially in Cambridge. A lot of people stay in Cambridge all summer, and a lot of people come to Cambridge during the summer, and so we felt we would like to spread it around.
And their way of spreading it around was to take the River Festival from a single week and spread the events all the way out through the summer. It sounded like a great idea when she said it. Do you think it worked?
I think that there were some problems with it that they recognized themselves, and that when you take something that's very concentrated and then spread it out, you're obviously going to spread out the attention that it may command. But the theory of spreading it out was to get it away from the river itself and put it into the community, into the neighborhoods. And there's sometimes been a feeling about the River Festival that it's a Brattle Street event, that it's a little bit elitist. And that's never really been true in terms of the people at the Arts Council, and they've worked very, very hard to make it very much a community-wide event, but it centers in Harvard Square in the past. And by spreading it out over the course of the summer, basically, it went all the way up until August 13th this year, and taking events and putting them directly in the neighborhoods, not just on the riverbank itself, but in the neighborhoods, they were reaching out to the community, and I'm hopeful that if they continue this plan in years down the road, that the community will respond to them in kind, frankly.
Now, I know that you personally have been keeping a close eye on the art scene. What other kind of events or changes, important things in the past year have you seen in arts in Cambridge?
I think that Cambridge is fast becoming a place to watch for theater, for example, and primarily because of the American Repertory Theater. As many people know, the ART this last year premiered a new play by a woman named Marcia Norman, and personally it was one of the most extraordinary evenings I've ever spent in the theater, being at that opening night. That play went on to win the Pulitzer this year for the best drama, and this year, the season that's just begun, they will be doing another brand new Marcia Norman play. And Marcia Norman is among the crop of new playwrights to pay attention to. The ART is one of the strongest and best regional theater companies in the nation. And that kind of atmosphere is going to filter into other theater companies, into other arts organizations. Cambridge has always been a cultural mecca, and it will continue to be so.
What have you been seeing in terms of arts and culture over the past year?
Well, I think that the Cambridge has a very exciting and vibrant cinema sort of coterie. There's the Off-the-Wall Cinema and the Orson Welles. They've taken chances when other cinemas wouldn't, and even though the Nickelodeon has gained a certain amount of prominence across the river, and now the SAC Theater is planning to open that amazing new complex, I think that the smaller theaters in Cambridge will continue to go off in new directions and sort of lead others along with them, and as David points out, it will continue to be a mecca.
Well, and
Cambridge.
over the past year, we saw the Harvard Square Theater changing its
Come
whole
back to
format.
life. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you for being on. Obviously, there's a lot we could talk about from the past year. And I'd like to thank you for coming on and helping give some perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this program, we've had a chance to take a look at what's been happening over the past year, but we're also in the process saying goodbye to the Cambridge USA program. This is our last program in this format. Beginning the week of January 9th, Cambridge USA will be joining in as part of a new expanded version of New England Today program, which will be airing on weekdays from 10 to 11 a.m. This marks 5 years of programming for Cambridge USA, and I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved with the show. To our director, Lou Schumann, to Herb Vetter, the executive producer, to all the associate producers who put so many hours into the program, and to everyone at Cambridge Forum and here at LVI TV who've made the show possible. I'd like to say thanks. And also I'd like to thank you for being here, for watching. I hope you'll be with me for the new Cambridge segment on New England Today. I'd like to wish you all a peaceful and a joyful new year.